Ah, France, the country where the far right wing, as it is known today, was born. Way before the financial crisis, way before Donald Trump became the President of the United States, way before Brexit and the uprising of xenophobic parties in Europe, way before all of that, France had an extreme nationalist party, the National Front, and it had a real chance to win an election. Actually, in 2002, the rest of the political players in the country, from the centre-left to the centre-right, had to join forces just to keep Jean-Marie Le Pen from becoming the President of France. In April 2017, French people are going back to the voting stations, and a lot of people think that this is the ultimate chance for the far-right wing in France. The moment where the National Front, with Marine Le Pen as its leader, can get the presidential office once and for all. If this was the case, Marine Le Pen, who by the way is the daughter of Jean-Marie Le Pen, has promised that she will do everything she can to take her country out of the European Union. But not only that, France is the second largest country in continental Europe. A victory for the extreme right would be a triumph for all far-right parties on the continent. But do just wait 1 minute, because the question is, really, does Marine Le Pen have a real chance of winning this election? Is there anyone out there who can possibly stop her? Today, we are going to answer all of these questions, and we're going to get to know in depth the history of the French extreme right. A story that includes wars, ego clashes, and, well, playmates. So, let's get into it.
The Le Pen clan.
The French extreme right has two ideological grandparents, Adolf Hitler and the OAS. As you know, during World War II, the Germans invaded the north of France. But the south, the so-called Free Zone, whose capital was Vichy, was governed by French politicians who supported the German National Socialism. When the war ended, the new president, General Charles de Gaulle, executed the main officials from Vichy. But do wait 1 minute again, because there were many people who supported this collaborationist government. People that, even without having political power, held the same principles and the same ideals as the National Socialists from Nazi Germany. And many of them were in the army. Decades later, in 1961, the French let their most precious colony, Algeria, hold a self-determination referendum. As you can imagine, this was not great news for all of those far-right extremists inside the French army. This is how the OAS was born. The OAS was a terrorist group whose main goal was to end the Algerian attempt for independence.
We are not terrorists, you understand. We are patriots. Our duty is to the soldiers who died fighting in Algeria, and to the 3 million French citizens who have always lived there.
So, did they succeed? Well, actually no. In 1962, Algeria became a sovereign state, and then the OAS changed their goals and tried to kill the French president himself. They thought that de Gaulle was a traitor to France. Fortunately though, in 1965, the French police dismantled the last cells of this group. Just like what happened after the end of World War II though, jailing the hardliners didn't mean there were no people supporting the general cause. France, the country of liberty, equality, and fraternity, had a large amount of people who hated the Algerians and had a nostalgia for the Third Reich. And this was the foundation that Jean-Marie Le Pen used to build, 10 years later, the National Front.
It is the media who only talk about the war over and over. Every day we are reminded of what was the war, the persecution of the Jews, the excessive behavior of the occupying forces, and so on.
The beginning of this party was no easy thing. During the 1970s, the National Front would never get more than 5% of the vote, and Marie Le Pen himself suffered a terrorist attack at his own house. Now, this, though, is when the really good part starts. In 1977, the Le Pen family inherited from a fellow supporter an entire palace. This was the Montretout Palace. Soon, this would become the unofficial headquarters for the National Front, or as we probably could just say, the Le Pen family. Yes, my friends, with this party, everything does stay in the family. From the palace, Jean-Marie organized all those electoral campaigns that made him the third biggest political force in France at the end of the 1980s. Meanwhile, his daughter Marine Le Pen was following him and learning the secrets and the art of politics in order to become the leader that she is today. Later, his granddaughter Marion Le Pen would follow him too, and she is now an MP in the French Parliament and a rising star in the National Front. Interestingly though, even though his party congratulates him as the champion of family values, Le Pen's family is far from a happy one. Yes, I do know here at VisualPolitik we really don't like to gossip about anyone, but in this case it's kind of absolutely necessary to understand the political life of this party. As I said, in the 1980s, Jean-Marie Le Pen, who we will now call Le Pen Senior, was on fire. In every election, he was getting more and more votes than the previous one. It was during this time that he decided to hire a journalist to write his own biography. And, of course, he let this journalist stay at the palace. So can you guess what this journalist did? Well, you probably can't unless you already know. He seduced Le Pen's wife. Oh, but it's not just that. These two lovers then ran away from the palace, and months later, Mrs. Le Pen was on the cover of French Playboy magazine. And this is how the whole world discovered the, more sensual side of the extreme right. Now, this caused a split in the family. No matter how good the father was doing in the elections, his daughter still grew more and more distant from him. But the real turning point in the Le Pen family would come in the year 2002. This was a year when France had presidential elections, and for the first time in history, Le Pen went to the second round. Now, as you might know, the French electoral system has two rounds. When they are choosing a president, in the first round, they can choose from all of the candidates, however many that may be. And in the second round, you can only vote for the two most successful candidates in the first round. Well, in 2002, the ones who made it into the second round were Jacques Chirac from the centre right-wing party and Le Pen Senior from the extreme right-wing. And so now you might be wondering, how did it happen that there were two right-wing candidates? I mean, are there no liberals in France? Well, during these years, Le Pen learned an important lesson in politics, the idea of the captive voter. A voter that is going to find some principles of the party attractive, no matter where they stand on the political spectrum. Le Pen stood for protectionism for French companies, but also for French workers. Do you remember the America First thing that Trump was going on about? Yeah, well, it turns out that's not Trump's invention. It was used by Le Pen in the 1990s. So in 2002, industrial cities like Marseille, who used to be left-wing strongholds, voted for the National Front. And this is why, in that second round, those who remained loyal to the Social Democratic Party had to swallow their pride and vote for Jacques Chirac, the centre-right candidate. I mean, anything was better than the uprising of a racist extreme conservative like Le Pen. And this is how the Le Pen family learned a second important lesson in politics. It is not only important to be accepted by your own voters, you also can't be too scary to the other people. If your opposition are too frightened, they might join forces to prevent you from getting into that presidential palace.
Marine versus Jean-Marie versus Marion.
Christmas was not a great time for the family after 2002. Marine Le Pen started her internal campaign against her father. Now, don't forget that Jean-Marie Le Pen was a politician that ran for elections with statements like this one.
There has to be an authority always, and we believe that in a household, the best one to have this authority is the man.
Nonetheless, Marine Le Pen was a woman ready to have authority and modernize a political party that would honestly make Windows 95 look like a piece of state-of-the-art software. Now, unlike her father, Marine supported gay civil unions and was against the death penalty. Even National Front voters could appreciate these changes. And this is why, in 2011, Le Pen Jr. took her father's place as the party's leader. But do not think that things were that easy.
I wonder what motivated Marine and her deputies in this offensive they have launched against me.
Just think about it. When you've been the founder and the leader of a French far-right political party for 39 years, it's not going to be easy taking orders from your daughter. So even though today Jean-Marie Le Pen is the honorary president of the National Front, he also votes as an independent at the European Parliament.
I campaigned not for Marine Le Pen, but for Jean-Marie Le Pen, and I won 33%.
And guess who's his main supporter inside of the family? Surprise, surprise, family business again. It's his granddaughter, Marion Le Pen, who is starting her own battle against her aunt Marine.
Provocation.
He is a provocateur, an anti-conformist, and it isn't always nice to hear.
Meanwhile, Marine's moderation in combination with the end of the crisis in France are working way better than the radical strategies of her father.
Conozco África y considero que Europa ha cometido
I consider Europe has made a mistake in the past. They should have started cooperation and development relationships with Africa. This way, they would have fixed the people in their own countries.
In fact, the latest pollsters for this 2017 election give her close to 25% of the vote. This makes her the first or second biggest candidate. And in an election with 5 candidates, 25% is a big thing. It is almost certain that she will make it into the second round. But do consider that just because she is less radical than her father, this doesn't mean that Marine is a moderate. In fact, far from it. Famous 144 points of her electoral manifesto, Le Pen Jr. stands for closing frontiers, massive deportations, the exit of the European Union, and the return of the French currency.
En todo caso, comparto con
I hold the same economic views as Vladimir Putin. This is true. But this is nothing new either.
Alright, so enough. You're probably now wondering, well, can Le Pen actually become the next president of France? So let's address this question with another question.
Who can stop Le Pen?
For years, the centre-right wing in France saw how Le Pen could steal their votes. Yes, it is true that a big share of the National Front votes come from the left wing, but in a time of crisis, family values and anti-immigrant sentiments are particularly attractive to conservative voters. So in 2016, the big party of the centre-right, the Republicans, chose a candidate who also put forward some of the proposals that made Le Pen famous. This man was François Fillon. So, is the strategy working well? Well, apparently not. Since Fillon became the party's candidate, Republicans have been falling on the polls, and they are now fighting for third position with the far right-wing party of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Corruption, sex scandals, and the fact that people prefer the original to the copy, this has caused Fillon and the centre-right to fall into oblivion. But there is still hope. The battle is not over. There is still a man who could be ready to stop Le Pen's hurricane. His name is Emmanuel Macron, and he was the finance minister during the government of Manuel Valls. Alright, so is Emmanuel Macron a socialist? Hell no. Macron is running in the elections as an independent. Even Manuel Valls himself didn't support him in public until relatively recently. So what does Emmanuel Macron stand for? Basically, he stands for the opposite of Le Pen. Macron wants to end the privileges and subsidies that French companies get. He wants to end the barriers that made it impossible for the French youth to get a job, and of course, he is against discrimination based on race or religion. When it comes to the economy, he wants to be a champion for deficit reduction and fiscal responsibility. And as if that was not enough, one of his proposals is to forbid high-ranking officials to employ their own family inside of the administration. So, as you can see, he is the antithesis of Marine Le Pen. And surprise, surprise, the latest polls actually indicate that he is slightly more popular than Marine Le Pen, with over 25% of the expected vote. And all of this despite being an independent. So he has a high chance of being the person that Le Pen will face in the second round. Or maybe not, because there is a last variable that we must consider, and that's abstention. Even if Macron has a lot of supporters, they are simply not as motivated as those from the Le Pen side. So, for example, if during the second round the National Front could retain 90% of their votes and Macron could only retain 40 or 50%, he would have great difficulty winning the presidency. But I mean, this is just our opinion at VisualPolitik, and we would love to hear yours. Do you think Macron could beat Le Pen in France? Are there any other candidates that could make a surprise resurgence during the election? Please do leave us a comment below this video, and don't forget that we publish brand new videos every Monday and every Thursday, so do not forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of those. And if you did like this video, please do give it a thumbs up below, and as always, I'll see you next time.
And don't forget to check out Reconsider, a podcast about politics where we don't do the thinking for you. You can find us at reconsidermedia.com. See you there.